Hey guys, welcome back to our JavaScript series. In this video, we're going to talk about objects in JavaScript. Now, objects is a very important topic to discuss, and it's basically a thing that will actually be helpful in a lot of things, right? A lot of applications in JavaScript use objects, right? Even when you were like doing console log, you were using an object called console, which you didn't knew about because you didn't knew about objects. But we're going to talk about that as well. But basically, objects are pretty important in JavaScript. So uh, I would recommend you to watch this video properly and try to understand everything properly. If you have any doubts, you can always ask me in the comment section below. Anyways, let's get started. Now, if you remember, when we were talking about variables and constants, we talked about this in lecture 5. If you have not watched that, you can watch that video. But basically, in that, when we're talking about literals, I told you that primitive, like basically the data type can be either primitive data type, which are basically number, begin, string, boolean, null, undefined, symbol, or it can be non-primitive, composite, or reference data types. That was something I told you about. We will cover that later on, right? And I told you that uh, there would be like single video for that, right? So, and that's what this video is. We are going to cover one of the non-primitive composite or reference data type called objects. Okay, and so that's the goal for this video, to cover objects in JavaScript. So let's get started and let's understand about objects. Now I've given a definition over here, but if I would explain from this, it would be very hard for you to understand. So I would actually go through the example first, and then I would take you to this. Okay, so let's do that. So imagine there's like a person. Okay, so think about a person. What things you can think about for a person? Like what properties a person has. So if you ask me, I would say like a person has like a name, right? And we can actually say first name, last name. Like we can actually separate that thing. Then a person has an age, it has a gender, right? And maybe like marriage status, right? So like is married, something like that. A person has what else? Fashion. So like there can be a lot of properties attached to a person. Like they all are related to one single person, and every person might have different properties for that. Okay, so yeah, that's basically what a person will have. That's the properties of a person. Now imagine I want to store this information in JavaScript. Now when I want to store this information in if I want to store any kind of information in memory, I need to use variables or constants. That's what you already know. So if I want to store these properties, I can create constants for that, right? So what I can do here is I can just go and say const person first, person one. So I'm talking about like one person here, first of all. So person one, first name, okay? And I say Tushar here. And then I have last name Vaswani, age is 20, gender is male, person one is married, false, person one passion is coding. So you can see over here, I created these, how many? Six constants, or you can create variables as well. But I created these six constants that basically show property of a single person, right? All these six properties actually show for a single person called person one, okay? And so you can see that's what it is. Now let's say I want to show properties for another person. What I can do in that case, I can just go and say const person two, and then I say first name Abhishek, and let's say last name is this, and then age, gender, is married, and passion. Okay. So here you can see I have created six constants for person one, which basically tell the properties for that person, and six constants for person two, which tells the properties for that person. Now, honestly, it's gonna work, it's gonna be fine, but think about it. Isn't it inconvenient that you have six different constants storing six different properties of that single person, right? The person is still the same, but there are six constants for that person. And that's the problem. See, person is an entity, is a single entity, is a single unit. And for storing properties related to that person, you have to create different constants for that, which is a trouble. And plus, if you think about it, right now I just talked about six things, six properties for a person. But obviously, any person will have like a lot more properties. You can think of a lot of properties. You can even think of over 100 properties, right? And let's like let's keep aside person. Let's take some other example. Maybe there's some other entity that can have like even thousands of properties. Now, what will happen in that case? In that case, you have to create 1,000 variables and constants for storing the information for that person, which is a big trouble, right? Plus, on top of that, if you think about it, you also have to go and name those constants in a way that they basically look grouped. So these constants together tell us that they are related to person one because their name suggests that, right? And these relate to person two, that's what their name suggests. So you have to do that name, you have to like basically decide the name in a way that basically they look grouped, but still they are stored in different variables and constants, and that's what object can solve. Objects can allow you to create a single constant or single variable which will store all the properties of an entity, and that's what objects are useful for. Now, to show how you can actually simplify all this with an object, I'm going to first of all tell you how you can create an object, and we are going to create an empty object in this case to actually show that. Okay, so let's talk about that. So see, there are two ways for creating an object with us. The one way is literal syntax, and the other way is constructor syntax. You can use any one of them, or but I would recommend using literal syntax instead of constructor one. Okay, so let's talk about literal syntax, and let's try to create an object through that, an empty object through that. So what you can do is you can just say um, a. So that's basically the constant or variable where you would store that object. And then you have to say equals to sign. Now, just like you did like 4, 5, or any like true or false, something like that you did over here, right? As a value. In case of objects, literal syntax, you have to give curly braces. Now, this might sound similar to blocks in JavaScript, like you have to use blocks to create blocks using curly braces, but they are different. So they don't have any kind of relation between them. Like both have the same syntax, almost same syntax, but they are different. Okay, so objects are also created with the curly braces. So this creates an empty object here. Okay, now to create an object with constructor syntax, you need to say const b, and then here you need to say new and then object here. Okay, that's how you can create an empty object. So these are two ways to create an empty object. This is the literal syntax and this is the constructor syntax. Okay, that's the thing. That's how you can create it. I would recommend using literal syntax. Okay, not the constructor one, because constructor one is more you can say verbose, but we don't need that kind of we don't need that kind of thing. We can just use literal syntax, which is more convenient. Okay, anyways, I hope that makes sense. That's how you can create an object. Let's go and take this Poker.js and let's actually start creating an object for a person. Okay, now for creating an object for a person, we need to understand about properties. Now, what is property? Property basically means you are attaching that property to an object. So like you saw, these are all properties, right? First name, last name, age, gender, is married, passion, all these are properties. So you can attach properties to an object. Okay, so to this single object you can attach multiple properties, and that will basically belong to this object. Okay, so how you can attach properties? Okay, let's see. So what you can do, you can say person one here. Okay, and to attach the properties, you have to, let me actually first of all turn Codium because I don't want this to auto complete things. But anyways, here what you can do is that you can attach first of all first name. Okay, so I can just say first name like this, and then I give the value for the first name. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm giving a name to the property. So you can see property name, and then I have to give a colon over here and then value. Now understand this. The property name over here, basically property name is called a key. So objects are basically collection of key value pairs. So this property name is basically the key. Okay, and keys can only be string or symbols. You can't use any other data type for keys, and the values can be any data type. So basically there's no restriction on the type of value, but the keys should be string or symbol. Okay, so here you can see I said first name, and then I have to attach like the first name. Let me actually turn Podium on here because it will help here. So I can just say Tushar. At some places, I block this Codium because it, irritates sometimes too much. But anyways, let's go ahead and do this. You can see it attaches all the properties automatically, and that's why I'm using it. Gender, and yeah, so you can see over here, what is happening over here. So basically you can see this is one single object, okay? And in that single object, you have multiple properties: first name, last name, age, gender, is married, and passion. These are the property names, or these are called key as well. And this is the value, okay? And that's the thing. That's how you can actually go and create a object. So you can see this person one object, and you can see the thing over here. This person one constant holds all the all like the whole object, which means it holds all the properties related to that person inside itself. And that's the advantage I told you, right? And then same you can do for person two as well. So you can do something like this, person two, and then you just attach all these properties, right? Now how you can go and print these things, like how you can print these objects, how you can access these properties. I'm going to talk about accessing these properties, but printing is obviously easy. You can just say console log person one. You just do that, and that will print the whole object for you, right? You can see all the object things over here. Everything that person one had got printed, right? But if you wanted to print over here, like if you want to print all the properties related to person one, you would have to print all these things one by one, which would have been a trouble. But here, you just had to print person one, and that printed all the properties associated with it. And the same will happen while you are accessing these properties. I will show you that very soon. And the same you can do with person two. So you can say person two, and that printed person two over here. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. That's how you can actually go and create objects and print those objects. Now let's talk about the next important thing in objects, which is methods. And that's a very interesting thing about objects. See, although you can see like I can like attach all these properties to the object, but not only that, you can attach some functions to an object as well. Okay. And that's where objects actually become even more helpful. Okay. So let's say you want to go and say calculator, and I say add function a b. Actually I can use an arrow function as well, a plus b. Okay. And then I can say subtract this, multiply will be this, divide will be this. So like that, you can see I created a calculator over here, okay, which has 4 methods on it: add, subtract, multiply, divide. Okay. And it takes those inputs and basically, get the output for that. Okay. And so you can see that's how you can like attach some functions to the object. Okay. And actually you can do one more thing here. Like let's actually take an example for person itself. Okay. So for example, in person three, say person three, I can say, let's see, let's copy this. So first name, I'm going to copy this exactly, but anyways, here, what I can do, I can just like add a function, introduce me. Okay. And that will go and console log the thing over here. My name is Tushar. So you can see basically what I'm doing here is that I'm like attaching like 6 properties to the object and one method to the object, one function to the object. Basically, when you attach a function to an object, it is called method. That's the name for it. Okay. And you can see there are 2 syntaxes for attaching a method. One is the one which I shown you right now, that you can just like, give the name to the method, like a key, right? Basically, it's in a way a key as only, and then as a value you provide a function. Now here, as a value, you can provide a function expression. You can provide like basically you can provide like any kind of function expression, even named function expressions. You can provide like arrow functions. You can provide anything you want to provide over here. You can do that. Okay. So yeah, that's the thing here. And so that's one syntax for attaching the method. Other syntax is this. So basically, I can do something over here that I can say, maybe like I can say, tell my age. Okay. So I can create like a function for tell my age. So I can do something like this, tell my age. And here instead of saying colon, instead of saying this, I will just directly say this, okay? And then I just do this, and then I inside that I just print my age, okay? So I just say 20 over here, okay? Now that's how you can see I can attach methods on the function, and then I can just uh, make that method do something. So in this case, this method would basically introduce me, and this would tell my age, okay? So these are two syntaxes for attaching a method. Now, why methods are needed to be attached over here? Like, you would understand about all these things very soon. But basically, that's how you can actually do this. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Anyways, let's talk about the next thing here. And the next thing is, and actually before that, maybe I can just go and show you what will happen if I print that. So if I say calculator, you will see that all these things are printed and a lambda sign is here, which is representing a function. As you already know in the function lecture, if we try to print a function, that just shows a lambda sign, okay? And the person 3, you can see I printed that. So like it printed all the properties, and then for functions, it just says lambda. But you can see this basically is a property, right? It's in a way a property only, but it's named as method because it stores a function inside it. If a property is storing a function inside it, then it's called a method. That's how easy it is. You can see even though like tell my age was like not declared like any other property, but still it's in a way represented like that only, right? Inside the memory, it's like this only, that tell my age is a property, and to that we have assigned a function, right? So I hope that makes sense. That's how you can like create an object. You can attach a property to it, attach the properties to it, and you can attach even methods to it. Now let's talk about uh, the thing over here, that is property and method keys. Okay, there's something I want to actually explain over there. So let me talk about that. But before that, let me paste it over here. Okay, so yeah, so basically the thing is that keys can be single word names, multi-word names, and computed names. Now again, as I just said, that even like method names are also keys, so this rule applies to that as well. Now I'm going to tell about all these things. But again, data types allowed for keys is string or symbols. As I already told you, you can't use any other kind of data type for that. I hope that's clear. So first of all, let's talk about single word names. So I can just say single word names over here, and let's talk about it. So let's create an object called person again. And here I would like to go and add some properties. So let's add first name first. So first name is, for example, John. It's fine. I actually wanted my name to be there, so let me actually do that only. Anyways, so you can see here that first name is Tushar here. Okay, I'm just going to save this, or actually I can't. Let me just format it because I hate single quotes for some reason. Anyways, so you can see over here that the first name is Tushar over here. Now this key over here might look single word, but it's actually multi-word. Okay, it's a multi-word key. The only thing is that there's no space between words. Okay, so it's basically, but it's camel cased. Okay, that's the thing over here, right? It is a multi-word key, but it's camel case. Because of that, there's no space between first and name. Okay, last name as well is like that only. It doesn't have any kind of space between the name. Okay, so it's also like a multi thing key. And then age 9, age 20, this is basically a single word key. Okay, let me actually remove this because I'm just going to tell you about everything in this object itself. Next, gender is also a single word key. Okay, passion is also a single word key. Okay, so yeah, basically all these things you can see are single word keys. Okay, now I'm going to talk about multi-word keys. Like I talked about multi-word key, but I talked about multi-word key which is camel cased. But can we actually go and create a multi-word key that uh that does that doesn't require camel case, and I can like just add a space between that? So the answer is no. And actually I can prove that. So if I just go and say is married, something like this. So you can see over here when I did that, it causes an error, right? I added like a space between is and married. Okay, let me actually small case it. But anyways, you can see here that there's like a space between the words, and that's why there's an error over here. So can you actually do this kind of stuff? The answer is still yes. You can actually do this, because if you do this, it will cause error. But what you can do instead is that you can just go and do something like this, and then you say is married over here. So basically what you're doing is that you're putting a double quote around the property name, and then that is working fine even when there's a space between it. And that's called an actual multi-word key. Okay, so multi-word key. Then we have finally the computed names, right? Or maybe like we can have more here, favorite food biryani, although it's not. But anyways, I don't love biryani that much. But anyways, so that's the thing. And then we have the computed names. Computed names, what is that? Let me show you. So let's take an example. Now, this example won't make any kind of sense, honestly. But yeah, I mean, it will just teach you the concept of computed properties. Okay. So let's say you have like let's say you have string a, string 1, which says, I don't know, maybe like a. Okay, and then you have string 2, which consists of b. Now what you want to do is that you want to go and say you want to like write a property over here which basically says ab. Okay, so what you can do in that case, you can use computed properties. So what you want is that you want to create a property. So let's say you want to create a property from these two constants in a way that the final property name is basically the concatenation of these two constants, right? So one way is to actually go and directly say AB over here, right? But let's say these values that you're getting, you would get these values dynamically. What will you do in that case? If you're getting these values dynamically, then you can't do that, because you can't pre-decide the values that would be there in these two constants. We know that we know these two values right now, but it might not always be the case. And so you can use computed properties in that case, where it will dynamically assign a property name according to the value you pass. Now to do that, what you have to do is that you just have to go and say this, right? So you do this. Let me actually turn off podium because I don't want it to interfere. But anyways, here what you do is that you just go and give this square bracket, and inside that you can say string 1 plus string 2. So basically I'm writing an expression that returns a value. I'm writing that here, and then wrapping it around these square brackets, and then I can give it any value over here. So let's say dynamic property, computed property name. Okay, now once I do that, this object has now a property called AB. Now to just prove that, I will just go and print this object, and that will prove this thing. So here if you see the output, you can see it has AB over here, which is what we did over here, right? I hope that makes sense. Now this computed property can be anything, literally anything. You can even just go and say like this. That's also fine. Like you can just say this, full name, let's say full name, and I say Tushar Vaswani. That will also work. It's not a trouble, right? It is gonna work fine. You can see, right? So yeah, it can be anything. It can be any kind of expression that returns some value. Okay, so that's what you can do over here, right? I hope that makes sense. And that's how you can actually go and use computed names, which are very important in some cases. I can't really find any kind of good example right now because I rarely use them. Like actually, I've never used them, I think, in production. So I don't have a good example, but maybe you could find it out on the internet. But my idea was to just teach you the concept here, which I hope you understood. Anyways, that's about this keys. So you can see here, single word, multi-word, computer names. That's all the kinds of keys we have. Okay. But as I said, data type allowed for keys is strings or symbol. That's the only data type that is allowed for it. Okay. Now, when I say this, you might say that in that case, I should not be able to do something like this, right? So that's something you need to understand. This is a very important thing to understand here. If you try to do something like this, it is going to cause no issues. It will work all fine, right? So actually, let me show you that. So if I do this, you can see it's working fine here. There's no error. And actually, if I show you the object, you can see over here in the object, you see that one over here, right? You can see that one thing over here with a value of value. That is working fine. So why it's working fine? We already saw that keys can only be strings or symbols. The reason is that the one you see over here, the number one that you see over here is not an actual number. It's basically stored as a string, right? I can't prove that right now until and unless we talk about the key value and entries thing in objects. I can't prove that right now, but again, I will get you the proof for that. Okay. And then the same goes over here. If I try to do true here and say true here, then this true is not really a boolean. It's stored as it's basically a string here. And in the object also output, you would see that, right? But you can't do something like this. This is completely invalid. Okay. That's something you need to understand. But now let's come to very interesting thing. You can actually go and do something like this. Let's say two, let's say value two. Now, in that case, it's still a string. Right now, like you can see, it's still a string only. You provided a number, but still a string only. Why that is happening? That is happening because even when you provided it a number value here inside the computed value, it will convert that to a string at the end. And that's the thing. As I said, it can't store numbers. It always has to store strings only. And that's why it will convert that to a string forcefully. Same goes over here. If I say false over here, okay, and if I say false inside that, now don't think that this will be a boolean. But if you like actually go on over here, you can see it's stored as a string, not as a number. Okay, not as a boolean value. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So yeah, that's the thing. And last but not the least, here if you actually go and use this, so here actually you can do something like this. Let me show you. So if you do something like this, and then you say to start over here, so you can see that works fine. Like you would not able to directly put an object over here because of the syntax error, but you can do that inside the computed value. When you do that, you will see that you will get something like this. The property name would be something like this. Now that's the proof that things are getting converted into string. Because when an object is converted into a string, it will show something like this in JavaScript. That's what it is. I can prove that. I can go and say um, console log. If I say string and I passed an object over here, I've already told you about this in type conversion lecture that you can explicitly convert anything into string with the help of this. So I can just provide person over here. When I do that, you can see it prints object, and that's the proof that these things get converted into string because key cannot be object. That's the reality. Okay. I hope that makes sense, and that's how you can actually go and use. You can have the keys basically. Okay, and as I said, keys can only be strings or symbols. Symbols we're going to talk about later on, so for now you can ignore that. Anyways, okay, now let's talk about accessing the value of a property and method and modifying it. That's very important because we saw about objects. We saw that we can like store properties inside an object and methods as well. But we still don't know how we can actually use those properties and methods, how we can access that and how we can modify that because it's important. In case of constants and variables, you know that you can do that. But how you can do that in objects is the question. So let's actually answer that. So let's go and take this over here. And for this, I would actually need this example. So I'm just going to keep this example over here because I will need that. And actually with that example, I will need these strings as well. So let's keep that as well. And let's go and take it at the top. And then I can delete the rest of the things. Okay. Now let's talk about it. So see, there are two ways to access a property or method. Okay. So the first way is to use dot syntax and the second way is to use square bracket syntax. Now, some people think that you can just use it interchangeably, but there are some things that you can't do with dot syntax, and that's where square bracket syntax helps. Okay, but but in most of the cases, you would actually prefer to use dot syntax because you would rarely come into this cases where square bracket syntax is required. Okay, because in some cases it's actually required to use only square bracket syntax. Okay. Anyways, let's talk about the dot syntax and let's see how you can access the property of a variable or a property of an object using that. So let's say I want to access first name of this person. So how I can do that? I can just use the dot syntax here and I can do something like this. I say person and then I want to access first name. So I put a dot here and then I say first name. Okay. That's how I can access the first name of a person. Okay. Same I can do for any property here. So person dot last name, like that I can do. Now, once I've accessed this value, I can store that value inside a variable or constant and I can do anything on that. Or I can just print that. So in this case, I would just print that value. So I can just say console log and I will print that. So you can see in that case, it gives me the shard at the output, right? Which is good, which is what it is, right? The same goes with last name. I can access that easily. That's how you can use the dot syntax. So you can see it's basically a dot that you put to actually access the values inside a variable, inside the object, okay? Now, let's talk about the square bracket syntax. Now, square bracket syntax, as I said, is not something that you can use interchangeably with dot syntax. There are some things that are extra with square bracket syntax, but basically, you can actually just alone use square bracket syntax without even thinking about dot syntax. Like dot syntax is actually much more cleaner, I feel. That's what I feel. You can have different opinion on that. But what I'm trying to say is that square bracket syntax can be used without caring about dot syntax. Basically, here I was using dot syntax, but I can do the same thing with square bracket syntax as well. That's what I mean to say. So I can do something like this: person first name, okay, and you can see I get the value of the shard. The same I can do with last name as well. So I can do something like this: person, and then I again use square bracket here, and then the property name. So the property name here is last name. That's how I can do it. So you can see over here, that's what I'm doing. Basically, person first name, person last name. So the only difference here is that here I was using dot, and here I'm using square bracket. And with that, I'm also providing the property name inside a string. That's what I'm doing. Okay. Now, there are some places where you can't use dot syntax. For example, I want to access one inside the object. What I can do in that case? So you might think that if I want to use dot syntax, I could do something like this: person dot one. That's what you might think. But in reality, if you try to do that, it will cause an error. Let me show you. If I do something like this, it will cause a syntax error. So you can see it's causing a syntax error here, which means you can't do something like this, right? Not possible with dot syntax. But the same thing is possible with the square bracket syntax. So you can do something like this: console log person, and then you say one over here, and that gives you the value of one, right? Or you can actually do something like this as well. You can just say one over here inside the string, and that will also give you the value. Okay. I hope that makes sense. That's how you can just do it, and that will work fine. Okay. So yeah, that's how you can use square bracket syntax. Like here, you can see it's very important to use that. Another place where you have to use square bracket syntax is when the property key is actually computed. Okay. When property key is computed. So in that case, like in some cases, you might know the computed value, then you can just easily use dot syntax as well, right? So let me show you that. So for example, in this case, I knew that this computed property will result into a property called AB. So I can just do something like this, right? I can just do person dot AB, which I can do. It's all fine. But what if you actually don't know that what will be the value, what will be the name of the property from the computed value? In that case, you have to use square bracket syntax, because square bracket syntax actually helps you to access even the computed properties without specifying the name of those computed properties. Okay. So here I can do something like this. I can just say console log, I say person, and then I just say string one plus string two. So you can see I'm directly passing that expression which I passed while creating the computed value. Okay. And that's why you can see the syntax is quite similar to the computed values. The square bracket syntax is quite similar to that. Okay. You can see over here, dynamic computed property name, that I got the value for that. Okay. So that's the thing. Uh, and then next is, let's say if I want to access this thing, what I can do in that case. So you might think of two approaches over here. Okay. The first approach is this, that you just go and say person dot what was that? Full name, I guess, right? Full name. Yeah. Actually, it's is married. Sorry. I can say is married. So you can see over here, in this case, this is what is the first approach you might think of. The second approach you might think of is basically this. So the thing is that both of these approaches will actually fail. Let me actually make M small case. But in this case also, it will actually fail. Let me show you. So if I go and keep this out of the comment, you can see it's failing. Okay. The same goes over here. This will also not work. So yeah, that's the thing. So here also it will not work. So again, here also you have to use square bracket syntax. So you can do something like this, person, and then you know what you have to do. You have to just say is married, and that will give you false over here, which is what it is, right? I hope that makes sense. So you can see sometimes square bracket syntax is the only option, whereas sometimes the dot syntax can work. And so if you want, you can use square bracket syntax only and just don't care about dot syntax. But I prefer dot syntax usually because it looks much better and this looks much messier. I don't know why, but this looks messier to me. So I always use dot syntax because of that reason. And then I usually don't have these cases with me. So I really don't care. But if I have this kind of case, I will actually go and use square bracket syntax in that case because that's the only option I have. But mostly I just use the dot syntax. Okay. So that's how you can just access the value of property or method. Actually, I just told you about accessing the value of property. Let's talk about accessing the value for a method. Now, you might ask why I will need to access the value of a method. I will need to access the value of a method because I might need to call it. And that's where this is important. Now, again, you can use dot syntax and square bracket syntax for doing that. Okay. So basically I can just do, let's say I have, okay, I don't have any method over here. Maybe I can copy that. So inside the intro to object, let me copy these two methods over here and paste it over here. Okay. So I have two methods over here. One I'm going to show you by the dot syntax and the other one I will show you with the square bracket syntax. Okay. So let's do that. So I can just do something like this person dot um, what was that first one is introduce me. So I can just do something like this that you can see basically prints lambda over here. Okay. Now once I have the value of the function, the only thing that I need to do is to call that function. So you already know to call a function you need to go and call it with the parenthesis. So you can do something like this over here, person dot tell my intro actually introduce me, and then I just call it, and that gives me undefined in the console log because I'm not returning anything from introduce me function. But in the object itself, you can see it will print that. It's not showing that print over here, but if you go to the console, you can see my name is Tushar is being printed. Okay, let me actually go and make it like this so that it actually prints that. So yeah, as you can see that it prints the my name is Tushar, right? So yeah, that's the thing. Let me actually remove console log from here because it's not needed. Then I am going to show you how you can do that with a square bracket. So you can do something like this, person, and then with square brackets you say tell my age, and you can see I get a lambda, which means I can now just call that. So tell my age, and I just call that. Actually, I need to use this syntax, and then I call this, and in that case you can see it, you know, gives me that console log. I hope that makes sense. That's how you can just go and access the value of a method. And again, all the rules of computed properties apply over here. If like if the name of the function is computed, for example, let's say if I have a function here called string one, okay, and then I just do something like this. In that case, you can again the only option with you is to actually use the square bracket syntax until unless you actually know the value of the computed property. But again, one thing you need to see, if you know the property of the computed property, then I don't see any kind of use case for that. Like why you're even using computed property in that case. If you know the property name, then just directly go and write that here, right? Why you need a computed property in that case? I don't understand that. Okay. But anyways, that's what we can do here. So you can just say console log person. I'm just directly gonna call it, and then I say person. Then I say what is this? A, yeah, and then I just go and say call. So I call that, and you can see here, it will print the string one here. I hope that makes sense. That's how you can just go and call the methods. Now again, all the things we discussed in functions would apply over here. So yeah, just don't worry about that. I'm not going to talk about that again. You can watch the functions lecture if you really want to understand about those properties that I told you about functions. But basically all that thing would apply over here as well. I hope that makes sense. Anyways, that's about this. That's how you can just go and access the value of method. Now, one thing from here, which you can understand, I hope you can understand that. Now see this syntax. It will actually make you remember about something, and that is console log. You can clearly see that console is an object. So you didn't know about it from so long, but console is an object, and you're accessing the log method of the console, and you're passing the basically the value to it that it prints on screen. So actually you can do something like this. You can console log the value of console. So basically you can see console has all these functions over here, right? And all these properties. You can see one log property over here, which is what we always call, but there's one, there's dir, there's time property, time and property. So you can see all these things over here. I hope that makes sense. Anyways, let's talk about the next thing. What will happen if I try to access a value of property or method that doesn't exist? Now you might imagine if I try to do that. Now again, you can do that with dot syntax. You can do that with the square bracket syntax. The results would be same. So I'm just going to do that with dot syntax just so that's easier to understand. But basically, if you try to do that, it will actually go and give you undefined. It will not throw any kind of error. That's the thing about JavaScript. You can call it the beauty of JavaScript. I feel it's a wrong thing with JavaScript. It actually doesn't throw error. Like it always usually like that's the behavior I've seen with JavaScript. It tries to hide those error with undefined or something like that so that you don't get an error, you don't get a runtime error. But I feel that's a wrong thing because when you don't get these errors, you can actually cause a lot of bugs. Like you might access the uh, access the properties of an object that doesn't even exist, and that will cause issues. So I feel that's not a very good thing to have. Might look good at first, but it's not. Anyways, let's do that. So if I try to access a property that doesn't exist, let's see what happens. So if I say person dot, let's say I don't know what doesn't exist over here. Maybe I can say uh, favorite food. So you can see in that case, when I do that, you can see it gives me undefined because it doesn't exist on the object. So yeah, that's the thing. And then again, that goes same with the methods. So if you're imagining that, okay, there is a method called, let's say, D on this person object, then there's no method on that. And so it will return undefined. And if you try to call that method, then it will say this error that person.d is not a function because D is not defined. And if we try to call that D, it will result to this, which is something that makes sense, right? I hope that makes sense. The next thing here is modifying the values of properties and methods. So this is something you can do as well. So you can just go and say person dot first name and you just say it to chart here. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm just literally assigning a new value to a property here of an object. I'm doing it like this, which basically resembles what you do with variables. Like you say let a equal to 4 and then you say a equal to 5. So the value of a changes from 4 to the 5 value. Okay, and that's how you actually go and change the values inside an object itself. Okay, so you can see person, if you just say person dot first name, it was to sharp, right? If I modify it to like Karthik, for example, and I just say person dot let's say person dot first name, in that case you will see it prints Karthik now. Okay, console dot log. So you can see that. So yeah, that's how you can modify the value of a property. The same you can do with method as well. So like here, now if I just call like, if I call the person dot introduce me function, you can see it's basically printing what? It's printing, actually let's do one thing. Let's return the value from here so that you can actually understand it way better. So let's return the value instead of printing it. The same goes over here. I'm just going to return the value 20. The same over here, return string 1. Okay, next here I'm just going to go and console log the value returned by this so that you can see that over here. The same I will do for this. Same for this. And then finally over here, yeah, I think then finally I can talk about this. So this will return you the introduction. So right now, if you see, the introduction returns you, my name is Tushar, right? This is happening because the introduction is still returning the old name. So let's actually modify this and give it a new function that says my name is Karthik. So what I can do over here, I can just go and say person dot introduce me, and then I just assign it a new function. That's it. That's all you need to do. So I can just go and say this, and I say return my name is Karthik. Okay. Then you basically go and call this function and print the value it returns, and this time it will actually return you the updated name. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. That's how you can update a method. Okay. Now, what will happen if I try to modify a value of property and method that doesn't exist? And that's a very interesting thing. If you try to do that, then it will create a new property. Okay, it will create a new property. Give it 1 second. Yeah, there we go. It will create a new property or method. Whatever you try to modify it, it will create that. Okay. So let's say, uh, let's see. If I just go and say person dot d, you can see d doesn't exist. But if I go and say person dot d equal to 4, so I modify the value of a property that doesn't exist. In that case, it will not throw any error. Again, common JavaScript stuff, which I really hate. Why it doesn't throw any error? It should throw any error, because you see these kind of things actually go and cause some bugs in the programs which you will actually spend hours debugging. So that's why I hate this. But anyways, you can see when I did that, it didn't cause an error. But if you actually check the person object here, it will add that property inside the person object. Let me show you. So you can see D is added in the person object. That's the thing. That's what happens over here. And now you can actually go and say person.d, and it will print that 4 value here. I hope that makes sense. The same you can do with methods as well. Let's say I'm trying to access the method person.e. The method doesn't exist. So if you try to say person.e over here and call that, it will cause an error. Okay, person.e is not a function. That's what the error is, right? Which makes sense. But if you try to go and do something like this, person.e equal to, um, I'm the function e, I'm the function e. In that case, if you try to go and print the value of person, it will add that e to that object. So you can see over here, it has added that e lambda to the object. And if you try to print the value of person.e now, it will print the lambda, which means it has a function now, not undefined. Now, if you go and call the person.e, it will actually return the value I am the function e. I hope that makes sense. That's how you can go and modify values of properties and methods, and that is what will happen if you actually try to modify the property or method that doesn't exist. Okay. So yeah, that's it. That's about accessing the properties and like accessing modifying the properties and methods. Now let's talk about adding and deleting properties and methods. Now you already know how to add properties. Like if I go and say an object, let's say, actually let's create an object here, const result. Now const object, actually let's call it like that. So if you try to add any property or method, how you can do that, you can just go and say object dot a equal to 4. That will add that property to the object. That's what we already saw here in the accessing and modifying properties and methods lecture, right? Let me copy it here. Actually, I should say object dot a. Oh, sorry, object. You can see before that it was actually undefined. It was actually empty object before this object dot a thing, and then it got this property a. Okay. The same I can do with an if a method. So I can do something like this. It has the method now. So if I try to print object here, it will have that method b. Okay. Now that's easy. We already talked about it. But the main thing is deleting properties and methods. Now to delete a property or method, what you have to do, it's very easy. So you just go and say delete. That's the thing. You need to say delete. You literally need to say that. And then you need to say object dot a. That will delete the property A inside the object. Let's try to go and see that. So now you can see object just has the property B actually the method B, it doesn't have any property called A now. Okay. The same you can do with square bracket syntax as well. You can do something like this as well. So object B, that will delete the property or actually the method B. And so the object will now be empty again. And that's how you can add a property or delete properties and methods from an object. I hope that makes sense. Okay, now let's talk about the keyword this. Now, keyword this is actually a vast topic. Like it's not a very simple thing to understand, right? But in this lecture, in the objects lecture, I'm just going to talk about this in relation with the object methods. But otherwise, there's a lot you can actually learn about this, which we're going to talk about later on. For now, that's the only thing you need to understand, that how this is actually important in terms of methods inside an object. Okay, and this would actually learning about this keyword will actually explain the real meaning behind methods of an object, and would actually make those things more clear and more meaningful. Okay, so let's talk about this keyword. So let's go here and see this. So I'm just going to go and get the person object. So in the intro to objects, I can just get the person object. So let's copy that here. Okay, and let's get this inside a constant person. Okay, now as I said, this keyword this is only important for methods. Okay, and just to make it clear, uh, when used with methods, this keyword basically helps you to reference the parent object. Okay, reference the object inside which the method is there, right? So that's what this is used for when you're talking about methods in a function, right? Methods in an object. That's how it is used there. Okay. So I can show you that. So basically, what you can do, you can actually print the value of this. So I can just go and say console log this. Okay. So you can see I can literally print the value of this. Okay. So let's try to do that. So to print the value of this, I would have to go and call person dot uh, tell my age, and that will print the value of the object itself. So you can see that's what it is doing. It's basically referencing the object inside which the method is there. So this method resides in this object, and so it basically helps you to reference that object. Okay, that's the thing, and that's how you can use this. Okay, so uh the practical aspect of this, let's understand the practical aspect here. The practical aspect over here is this. For example, if I go and say person one over here, and then I just get this. Also, actually, one more thing before we continue, if you try to do this over here, if you try to access the value of this over here, it would actually show you something else. So person dot introduce me, and you can see that actually prints something else. It prints something called global this. Now what is that? We're going to talk about global this later on, but basically the thing is that you're using an arrow function over here. I told you about functions there. I talked about this, that arrow functions has some difference which we're going to talk about later on, and that is one of the difference here, that you can see that when you try to access the value of this from this arrow function method, it will actually not reference this thing. It will actually reference global this. Now what is global this we can understand later on, but the point is that don't use the arrow functions here, because otherwise it will like print the global this instead of actually having this. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So we'll print global this. Now let's actually talk about the next thing which we are discussing, and that is to actually go and create a function, create an object utilizing all these things. So let's go and copy this. And as I said, the practical aspect over here is you can actually go, let me actually write a function over here, because as I said, I can't really use the arrow function over here. Okay, then I just go and say return my name is, and now here I can utilize this. Okay, so I can just go and say this, and I just say this dot uh, first name, and then I just say this dot last name. Okay. Then here, tell my age. Again, I can just use that. So I can just return uh, your age is, and then I just say this dot age. Okay. So in this case, you can see I didn't hard code the name as I was doing earlier, right? I was hard coding the name over here. But now I'm actually referencing the values of the object and then actually creating the return value. So I can actually go and show you this. So if I say person1 dot introduce me, that will go and return, let's say, let's see, you can see it's returning my name is Tushar. So it's returning the string properly. Okay. The same goes over here. If I say person1 dot tell my age, that will also that will also work properly. Okay. I hope that makes sense. You can see that's what it is doing. Now, one that's one of the practical aspect of it. And there's one more important thing which you need to understand. So if you remember when we were talking about modifying the property values, you know that when I modified first name, I had to modify the introduce me function as well to actually reflect the first name value. But in this case, that is not required anymore because you change the value of first name, and if you call the function, then it will use the updated value. And that's the thing. And that's one more practical and very important thing over here, you can see. So if I just go and say person1, and if I say first name equal to Karthik, for example, and let's say person1 dot age equal to maybe 40. Now if I just go and say console log person1 dot introduce me, it will introduce it as Karthik. Okay. Because it's reflecting like it's actually getting the value from the object itself, and it's not hard coded there. And you say person1 dot tell my age, and that will just tell your age. I hope that makes sense. One last example I would give you over here, that is for calculator. So I can just go and copy this calculator thing, and what I can do over here is that I can just create this and say A is 4, B is 5. Now what I do, I don't take any A and B over here, and I just directly use this thing. So again, I can't use this arrow function because that doesn't have this referencing the actual object. So I just need to use this syntax. So it's dot A plus this dot B, right? That's what I can do. Uh, I have to do the same for subtract, multiply, and divide as well. So let's actually use Codium for that because I'm too lazy for doing that. So I'm just gonna enable that, and then let's do that. So subtract, multiply, and divide. That's great. And now, if I just go and use the calculator, console log calculator dot sum, you can see it's returning. Actually, it should be add. So it's returning 9 over here because it's actually referencing these values, right? Now, if I go and say calculator dot a equal to 10, and then if I go and say console log calculator dot add, it would now show you the value of 15. So that's one more example for this keyword this. Okay, I hope that makes sense, and we would understand about keyword this, don't worry, in detail later on. For now, that's all we need to understand. Next thing we need to understand is about nested objects. Okay, so let's talk about it and let's understand this. So let's remove this from here. Okay, now let's talk about nested objects. So as you know that we have the person object, let's actually copy that. So where it was in this, yeah. So I just copied this. Maybe this one is better. See, because this uses this properly, so I feel that's a better option. But anyways, let's go and say person, and I say this object. I can see over here that it basically has all these things over here. Okay. Now, what I mean by nested objects, I hope that's clear. Nested object means that an object has a property, and that property has a value that is of type object. Okay. So something like this. For example, if I go and say, um, let's actually see over here only. So I can have this inside a thing called name. So there would be a property name, and then inside that I will have first name and then the last name. I hope that makes sense. So we can see inside this property name, I have an object which has these two properties, first name and last name. And actually I can just say first and last over here. Okay. Now when I print this object, you will see the same over here in the print, that it actually is like that. Okay. I hope that makes sense. Now, how to access these nested properties? It's very easy. You can just go and say person dot name dot first, and that you can see gives you the thing over here. So you can see I'm using dot syntax, and I'm putting dots 2 times. First of all, I go into the person object and get the name property over here, and then the name property itself is also an object, so I can access the property inside that object using dot syntax again. So you can see that that was actually an object, so I can do that because of that reason. Okay, let's do that over here. Okay, and then same I can do with last. Okay, now I can also do this with the square bracket syntax. So I can do something like this: person dot person name. Obviously, that will print the object itself. And then if I go and say person uh, name, okay, and then I now this at this place I need to again put square brackets, and then I just say first. So you can see that's how I'm doing it. I'm putting one square bracket and then property name, and then another square bracket, that property name, and that gives me the value. The same over here. Okay, I can also mix both of these things, so I can do something like this actually. So person dot uh name, okay, first, something like that can be done. And then the same can be done like this as well: person name dot first. So yeah, all that is possible. Like you can just mix these two syntaxes. I don't know why you do that, but I just told you about this, that this is possible. Because see, this gives you an object, right? And then the object you are applying the square bracket syntax, which is completely valid. And then here also with the square bracket syntax, you get an object on which you are applying dot syntax, which is again valid. So I hope that makes sense, and that's how you can like access nested properties. And see, you can nest any object to any level. So you can do something like this as well. So you can have a property A over here, and that will do something like this. So C4, and then we have D over here with the value of 5, and then E over here with the value of with the F with the G equal to 6. Okay, so if you see the object here, it is like a very nested object if you see, right? So you can, let's say if I want to access G over here, what I can do in that case, if I want to access G and C, so I can just easily go and say console log. Now just see this. And by the way, you already see the autocompletes, right? Person dot. Now you see the autocomplete for the property you want to choose. So Visual Studio Code helps in every scenario for that. You go to the A property, and then inside that you have multiple properties over here. I want to access like what I wanted to access. I wanted to access C. So I can say A dot B dot C. So B dot C. So you can see that works. The same over here. A dot E dot F dot G. So person dot E uh, dot A dot E dot F dot G. So you can see that gives you 6. So I hope that makes sense. You can see it's a very nested object, but I'm still able to access all these things. Okay. And you can obviously change the values as well. So you can do something like this: person dot A dot E dot F dot G equal to 10. And then if you try to print the value here, it will actually show 10 over there. So all that stuff is possible with that. Okay. So yeah, that's all the things. And again, delete is also possible. So I can just delete the property person A dot, let's say if I delete A dot E dot F, okay. Uh, yeah. So in that case, if you see, it will just, have person. If I print that, you can see that it just has up to the E, because you deleted F here, okay, which had G inside it. Now, if you go and say delete person dot A, that will delete the whole nested object. So you can see over here that deletes the whole nested object over here. So I hope that makes sense. And if you delete, if you want, you can delete inner properties as well. You can delete the whole nested object together. Okay. So yeah, that's also one more thing which is possible. The next thing over here, I can just print the value of introduce me, but this would actually break. So I can do this, and you can see it's saying my name is undefined, undefined. Why it is saying that? Because this is not updated for this nested object. What I can do over here is that this dot name dot first, and then here this dot name dot last, right? And now you can see this is working fine. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah, that's how you can just go and use nested objects. That's how you can like create nested objects. And again, there's no limit on the nesting you can do. You can do all regular stuff you did with normal objects that we just understood till now. So yeah, that's the thing. Let's go and copy this over here and let's talk about the next thing that we have. The next thing that we have is basically the optional chaining. Now, it's a very important thing, especially when there are nested objects. It's a very important thing to understand there, because when we have nested objects, sometimes things actually break. Okay, if you try to access a property that doesn't exist. So as I already told you that you can access a property that doesn't exist and that will give you undefined. But when you talk about nested objects, the story is little bit different, not completely, but there is a little difference there. Okay, so let me actually get an object here which I have already written. I'm just going to paste that over here directly and we can just talk about that directly. Okay, so here you can see this is a deeply nested object. Let's say I wanted to access the property G over here. What will happen in that case? I can do that, right? I can just go and say console log uh, deeply nested object e dot f dot g, and inside that I can even access I, for example. So that gave me the access to I. Okay. Now tell me what will happen if I try to go and say, now imagine there was uh, like a property called I, and then you had a J over here, okay, um, value, okay, and then you have a K over here with L over here, and that has like M4 and N2, okay, that's what you had, okay. Now what you did is that you just tried to access the value of I. That will work fine because I currently exists, right? But let's say if I actually try to delete deeply nested object.I, what will happen in that case? If I try to access the value now, you already know what will happen. Now you won't be able to access the value of I. It won't throw any error, but it would still cause undefined, which is what happens over here, which is all good. Now let's say inside this I wanted to access the value of M. What I can do in that case? I can just go and say deeply nested object, and then inside that I just say I, and then inside that we have K, inside that we have L, inside that we have M. That's what I wanted to access. So I got the access to that, which is all good. Now this will cause error. Why? Because you see the deeply nested object.I is undefined. Okay. On undefined, you can't access the value K. The property K you can't access on undefined. Sure, you can access a property on an object, but you can't access a property on undefined, right? So if I run this, you will see that it's saying cannot read properties of undefined reading K. Okay, so that's what it is saying, that you can't read properties of undefined reading K. So this is undefined, as you can't read property K from undefined, and that's the error. Okay, let me go and comment this thing because this won't work as I said. So now let's imagine that there is a property called S inside this object P, and that S has a property called T, which has a value of 3, right? Now, let's comment this. So, if you say deeply nested object dot, now you have to go till P, okay? So, E dot P dot. Now, you think that S exists, but it doesn't exist. So, if you say S dot T, it will actually cause this issue. Cannot read properties of undefined reading T. So in this case, you can see here it was like cannot read properties of undefined reading K. That is, here it was the error, but now the error is on this level because this is basically giving you an object like this, because E is an object. From there you access the value of P, which is again an object with Q and R, and then from there you try to access the value of property F, which doesn't exist, so that becomes undefined. Okay, and from that you try to access T, which is not possible, and that's why you're getting cannot read properties of undefined reading T. I hope that makes sense, and that's the thing you need to understand. This is what will happen if you try to access a property that doesn't exist in the deeply nested object. So sometimes it might have undefined, but if it's deeply nested and one of the property here is undefined, like K or L, then it will actually cause this error, cannot read property of undefined reading K, which makes sense as well, right? And that is the thing. And that's why where optional chaining becomes important. So let's say this was actually a case. Basically, it might happen that this will exist, or it might happen that this will not exist. In that case, optional chaining is very important. So here, basically what I can do, I can just go and say console log, okay? So I basically copy this whole thing. So for example, here we know that S may or may not exist. In this case, it will not. So that's why it's causing error, but it may exist as well. So in this case, what I can do, I can just go and say this. Okay. So in this case, you can see what I did. I just put a question mark on the left hand side of this dot, full stop, which basically tells JavaScript that this property S might exist or not. Okay, if it doesn't exist, then you have to stop over there and give undefined. Otherwise, if it exists, then you have to go till this. Okay, so for example, if I go actually add that property here, so if I actually or actually let's first of all see this example. Okay, so I was undefined, so you need to put that here. Okay, and then you can see that gives you undefined. Okay, now again, if you think that uh, inside I, like if I exist but K may or may not exist, right? Or let's say L may or may not exist, then you have to add an optional chaining over there as well. Let me show you an example. So there's like a property, for example, O, and inside that, and first of all, O may or may not exist, and inside that we have like P, and inside that we have Q, and inside that we have R with the value of 1. Actually, let's make it more deep to make it more clear. So S is 5. Okay, so what do you think is that this may or may not exist? And then this, wait, this one may or may not exist. Okay, so in that case, you have to add optional chaining on those only. Okay, so I can just go and say console log, and I say deeply nested object, and then I say, let's see, what is it? O dot P dot Q dot R dot S. Yeah, that's it. So here you know that P and R may or may not exist. So basically what you can do, you can add a optional chaining over here, because if P doesn't exist, then it will basically stop at this point, and it will understand that it has to return undefined. The same goes over here. It will stop at this point because R may or may not be defined. So if R is not defined, then it will stop at that point. If R is defined, it will print undefined. Sorry, it will print the value. So you can see here, it printed a value because R was defined and S was defined inside that, which means it just printed 5 here. I hope that makes sense. That's how you can use optional chaining. Okay. Optional chaining can also be applied on methods, by the way. So if I have like a method over here called T, okay, then I can just actually inside T, let's say you have like U, which is a method. So do this, and so here, what you can do here is that you can just go and like call deeply nested objects dot what's the property T dot U. Okay, so here what you can do, let me show you. So this over here is the thing. So let's maybe like return the value of hello from this, so that I don't have to look above again and again. And here I console log this. Okay, but what if you think that this T may or may not exist, or let's say U may or may not exist? Let's first of all say that U doesn't exist. So in that case, let's actually delete that. So deeply nested object dot T dot U. Now U is not there. So if you try to now go and do this, then it will cause an error. Basically, yeah, you can see deeply nested object dot T dot U is not a function because it will be undefined, and so that's why it's showing you that. Okay. So what you can do over here is that you can use optional chaining on method calling as well. So you can do something like this: deeply nested object dot T. Now you think that T might exist, like T will exist, but U may or may not exist. So you can say U, and then you say this dot, and then you say this, and you can see in this case you get undefined here. Okay, if you did that before you deleted U, then in that case you would have got the hello, just like you get before using optional chaining, right? So I hope that makes sense. That's how you can apply optional chaining on functions, on methods, basically, that you put like question mark and full stop. Just one last example, actually two last example. Let's see. So we have v over here. That's a direct method on the object, so that returns, let's say, hi. Okay. So what I can do over here, I can just call v, right? So I just call v over here and console log the value. So deeply nested object dot v, okay, and that will give me hi. But let's say if I delete v, so delete this v thing, and if I go and say deeply nested object dot v, then it prints me undefined. If I try to call that thing, it will actually go and fail, and it will say deeply nested object dot v is not a function, which makes sense, right? And so yeah, that's the thing. Let me actually add that here. Okay, and let's comment this. Now let's go and use optional chaining over here. So you can just say deeply nested object, and then you say dot v, and then you say this, and that's why you can see it works fine. So console log, and you can see it prints undefined. If I would have done that before deleting the v, then you can see it prints high, similar to the one without optional chaining. So I hope that makes sense. That's how you can use optional chaining. So now let's talk about the key values and entries thing. So basically we have some important methods that we can use to actually do a lot of stuff on objects. Now let's say I want to access just all the keys inside this object. What I can do. Now, if you actually print this object directly, then you know that this will like print the keys as well as values as well. Okay. But what if you just want to access the keys of the object? Let me actually turn off the podium. I don't want it to be there. Uh, just access keys of the object. In that case, you can use something called object.keys. Okay. So this is a method you can use to actually access the keys of an object. So what you do is that you just say object.keys. Okay. And then you pass it the object for which you want to get the keys. So here you can pass person, for example, and this function will then return you the keys that this object has. So if I print that, you will see that it gives me something called an array. Now we are not talking about array, but basically you can see it gives me an array that contains all the keys in the object, right? So it gives me like how many? 8. Okay, that's what it had. So yeah, it also gives you the method keys as well, not just the property keys. Okay. Now, what if you want to just access the values of the object instead of the keys? In that case, you have a similar function called object.values. Okay. Now this basically helps you to get the values of the function. So what you can do, you can just go and say console log. Again, this would actually go and return you an array. Okay. So values person, and you can see that gives me all the values inside this function. Okay. And again, if this function had a nested object, let's say a, b4 and c5, in that case it would have, like in this case it will like show a as well here, and in this case it will print the object. Okay, it won't further go into that object and get the values from it. That also it won't do that. It will just print the whole object on the console, right? So I hope that makes sense. Now the last thing we have is to just to basically access values and the keys and values in a way that you can iterate on them. Now, what is iterating on something? Uh, I will tell you about this later on. For now, you can just understand this, that if you actually go and say object.entries, and basically this is actually done by object.entries. So let me write that down as well. And so if you do object.entries and pass the person object, you can see it will give you an array like this. Okay, so here you can see it gives you an array with multiple arrays inside it, and basically each array has 2 elements. First one is the key, and the value of that key is the second element. So you can see that's how it is giving you back the object as an array, and that's important if you want to iterate on it. I will tell you what is iteration, but hopefully all these three things are clear. So now let's talk about for and loop. Now, for this, I've like given an example over here, person object. Now, what is looping? You already know about looping. If you don't know, just go and watch the iterative statement lecture 12. But basically, looping basically helps you to uh, uh, execute a block of code multiple times, right? That's what looping helps you. Now, when you say looping over an object, that means you are looping over all the properties of the object, all the methods of the object. Okay. And for that purpose, you can use something called foreign loop. So let me show you the syntax for foreign loop. You need to say for, and then you need to say const, and then you need to say like the constant. Actually, you can just say let as well here. Doesn't matter. But let me go and use const here, and then you need to define the and then you need to define the constant name over here. So let's say the constant name is property, and need to say in, and then you need to say the object that you want to loop on. So person. So you can see what we are doing. We are just, looping over the object using for in loop. And what I did is that I just passed this thing, right? I didn't pass that this kind of syntax. If you remember, the actual for syntax we learned was this, right? So maybe like something like this. Let I equal to 0, um, like that we learned, right? But again, that's not what we are using over here. We are using foreign, which is completely different here. But again, it's also used for looping, and basically it will loop over the person object, and for each property and method, it will execute this block. That's what foreign loop will do. Okay. So yeah, basically you're looping over the person object, and you get the property or method name inside this um, constant. Let me show you. So if you console log the property or method name value, you will see that it will have all the names of the properties and method. It will actually print all the property and method names one by one. You can see it's printing first name, then last name, age, gender, all the things it's printing one by one. I hope that makes sense, right? So it's basically printing the property or method name when you're looping over an object. Okay. So now you can actually use that thing to actually access the value of that property or method. How you can do that? You can do that with the help of square bracket syntax, which we already talked about. So you can do something like this person, and then you pass the property or method name that will give you the value as well. Okay. So essentially you can do something like this: console log um, value of property, and then you just say property or method name is, and then you just say person property or method name. So you can see over here, it will print all these things. Value of property first name is Shah, value of property first name is last name is Vaswani. Like that, you can see it's printing all the things over here. Okay. Now, at some places, it's really weird because I was actually trying to print the whole function, right? So don't worry about that. But basically, I hope you understood what I'm trying to do here, and I hope you understood how we can loop over an object using for and loop. The next thing we need to understand is about testing property existence. As the name suggests, basically you can use this to understand if a property exists in an object or not. So basically you can do something like this: console log. Let's say you want to check if first name property exists on person object or not. You can do first name in person. So you see the syntax actually tells everything. It's so clear, right? That you're saying first name in person. So you're just asking for that, and it returns you a Boolean value called true, which means first name is there inside person, which is correct. One more example: tell my age, tell my age in person, and you can see that will return you true again, right? Finally, let's try to see what will happen if I try to, test for something that doesn't exist. So, for example, let's say be in person. So when I do that, you can see it returns false. So you can see that's how you can test if a property or method exists on a object or not, right? Now let's talk about destructuring syntax. See, destructuring syntax is actually helpful when you want to extract out the properties uh, of an object, properties or methods of an object into variables and constants. That's where destructuring helps. For example, let's say there's a object, for example, called obj, and that has like a equal to 1, b equal to 2, and c equal to 3. Now, what I want to do, I want to actually extract out all these properties of this object obj into separate variables and constants. How I can do that? The way to do that is to do something like this, right? I just go and say a equal to object dot a. That's how you can do it. So you can see you got out the property A from an object obj into a constant A. The same I can do with variables as well. So I can just do something like this. And then this as well. So now if I go and print the value of A, B, and C, it will actually give you the values properly. Let me do that, and you can see it's all working fine. The same I can do with methods as well. So I can do something like this. For example, there's a method called D, which goes and returns, let's say, 4. So in that case, I can also extract out D into an object, into a constant, for example, and then I just go and print the value of D, and then I can also go and print the value of D calling D. Okay, so you can see that prints 4. So that's the way you can get the properties out of an object into constants and variables. But that's one of the way. Easier method is something else, and the easier method is actually to destructure the object. How you can destructure an object? So let's talk about destructuring this. So I want to destructure this into A, B, C, and D. To do that, you can do something like this. You can just go and say const, and then here again you can do const or let, whatever you want. That's all your wish. Okay, so I just do const here. Okay, and then I just go and say this object thing, curly braces. Okay, and then I say equals to, and then I write the object name which I want to destructure. So in this case I want to destructure obj, so I just do that, and now the object is destructured. Now obviously we didn't got any constants created right now, so let's do that. So let's say I want to extract out A, so I can do something like this. A, I can just write that directly. That's all I have to do. Once I do that, I have the constant A created, so I can actually go and print the value of A here, and that's 1, which is basically what the value of A was. By the way, just to prove this is a constant, I can just go and say A equal to 4, and that's giving me an error because A is constant. Okay. Now, same way I can just go and extract out other properties. For example, extract out A, C, and D into constants. So I can just extract out those properties into constants. Okay. And also the method. Okay. Now I just go and print the value of C as well. You can see C is 3. And then I print the value of D as well. D you can see is lambda, which basically means a function. So I just go and print, call this function to get the value, which is 4. Okay. That is also working fine. Now, you can also do it let, for example. So I can just go and say obj here, and I just extract out B, which I earlier extracted out as let. So again, I can do that, and I can print the value of B here, and that will give me 2. Okay. Now I can also change the value here because this is let. So this is a variable. I can change the value. So I can just go and say console of B now, and that will give you the value of 4, and there's no error. So yeah, that's how you can actually go and destructure the properties or methods of an object into constants and variables. One thing you can see here, I commented this. The reason was to actually not cause any collisions, because again, these are real constants and variables. So you can't name two constants and variables the same. So here, if I again remove the comment over here, then you can see I get an error. That's why I was putting the comment, because these will actually collide just like real variables and constants do. Okay, because they are no way different from that. Okay, that's the thing. Now let's talk about this giving an alternative name first before we talk about nested objects. So as you saw, if I go and extract out A when there was already a constant or variable A, then it is giving me an error, which is very normal, right? So that's the thing that is happening. But sometimes what happens is that you have a variable or constant that is having a similar name to the property or method inside the object. In that case, can we go and actually extract out the property and method? Because right now what we have seen is that you can't do that, because when you try to extract a property or method, you need to give the name of that property or method that you want to extract out, and it will create the variable and constant of the same name, which means if there's already a constant or variable of the same name, then it's not possible to destructure. Okay, but there is a way. The way is to actually give an alternative name to the destructured property. So if I go and do something like this, for example, const a equal to obj, that's giving me an error, right? Because cannot redeclare block scoped variable a. But I can do something like this. For example, if I go and say obj here, now I need to say a again here. But what I need to do, I need to give this colon. After that, I need to tell the alternative name that I want to give to this variable or constant for the property a. So I can just say, for example, a2, for example, it's just an example again. So the variable and constant name might sound very uh, weird and doesn't make any kind of sense in real life. But anyways, I just go and now print the value of a2, and you can see that I'm getting the value of 1, which is what the a has. So I'm able to extract the value of a property, or I can do the same with method as well, into some other variable or constant, like into a variable or constant that is named something else from the property name. The same I can do with other functions as well. So here d cannot be done, right? I can just write it here and d. Now I can just go and say here d2, which will go and extract out the thing properly into d2. I can also go and call this function because it's still a function. So I can do that, and that gives me 4. Okay. So yeah, that's how I can go and give an alternative name to destructured properties. Now let's talk about nested objects. What will happen if I want to extract properties from a nested objects? How I can do that? So here, let's say there's an object, nested object, and that has like a, for example, a4. Okay. B, I have C inside that. That has a value of 1. And then there's like D, for example, which is like having E here, which is having F, which is having G of value 4, and then having H here of value 7. So here you can see I have a nested object right now, which has a lot of properties nested. Okay. Now in real life, you might not see this level of nesting, but again, I just want to give you a complex example so that you understand the concept properly. Okay. Now let's say from this nested object, I want to destructure A. That's very easy, right? I can just go and do something like this, nested object, and I say A over here, which is very easy. I can do that. Again, A cannot be redeclared. So maybe what we can do is that we can actually get this inside a block. Okay, so that's a trick I can use. The trick that we learned from blocks lecture. Do watch it if you have not watched it yet. Anyways, here you can see we got the value of A. Now I can just print the value of A, and that will just go and work fine. Okay. Now let's try to destructure C. How I can do that? Now you might think the way to do that is to actually go and get the value of B here. So I can just destructure B from this, and then I go and say something like this, and then I just get the value of C from this. Let me just go and say B over here. So you can see B gives me C1. So this gives me like an object. So the whole the property was an object. So that's why you got the whole object into this B. Now from that B, you again apply destruction to get out C. So now if I go and print the value of C here, that will give you 1. So that's one of the way to do it. But imagine if it was very nested. If it was a lot of, if it was like a very nested object, in that case you will have to go and destructure again and again and again until you reach the final value you want to extract, which is tedious. So a better way to do this is to actually go and do it in one line. How you can do it in one line? You can do it by following what I'm telling you right now. Let's say you want to get uh let's say I want to get I, for example. So to extract out I from here, you can just say first of all t. Now till now everything is same, just like I did in case of B, but now there will be a change. The change is to give a colon over here. Okay. Now you already know the colon actually goes and gives an alternative name. So don't get confused. I'm not giving an alternative name to this constant D. I'm actually doing something else. Now After doing that, you again give this curly braces. Okay. After that, inside this, you say I. And now you can print the value of I that will actually reflect the original value of I. You can see 4. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. What I'm doing is that I'm getting the value of D, that I'm just extracting out D, but I'm not stopping over there. I destructured that D on the same line and I get out I from that. Okay. And then I get the value of I here. Okay. One thing that you need to understand, D would not be created in this case because your main target was I, so D won't be created. So if I go and print the value of D, it won't be possible. Actually, it's getting the D from outside. Okay, that's why it is working. Otherwise, D would not have existed over here. Okay. Anyways, uh, let's talk about the next thing. The next thing over here is, let's have if I want to extract G. Now that's a difficult task. But again, if you understand this syntax, you can easily do this. So first of all, you get D. Now you have already extracted out D over here. So inside this object, you can directly do that. So uh, I want to get out what? I want to get out E. So I can just give a comma and say E over here. Now that will get out E, but what I want is G. So again, I give a colon over here and then give an object thing over here. Now inside this, I just go and say F. That gave me F, but again I want G. So I again do this and then I get the value of G. So here, if I try to print the value of G, that will give you the value of G, that is 4. Okay. But the thing is that you can't print the value of E and F because these things won't be created. Just like D would not be created. Okay. So if I go and say E here, you will see E is not defined. The same goes for F. Okay. So yeah, that's one thing you need to understand. So that's how you can destructure the nested object. One last thing over here is that you can actually go and use the alternative name thing as well here. So let's say I want to give an alternative name to, let's say, K. For example, I want to extract K, but I want to extract K as L. Okay, I don't want to get it in K directly. I want to get it in L. By the way, you can see when the document got formatted, here you can see that this actually turned into something like this, which is more clear, right? This is more clear syntax, and that's why formatter actually made it like this. Okay. Now I want to extract out J. So it exists in D. So D is already destructured. So I can directly put J over here. Okay. That gave me J. But I want to get what? I want to get K. So in that case, I can do something like this. And then I say K over here. Now to this, I need to give an alternative. So it's a very easy thing. You just go and do something like this. And then you give the name L to this. So in this case, K won't be created. Okay, this won't work. But L would work. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. That's how you can just go and do this. That's easy. And you can give an alternative name to whole object as well. So for example, if I go get a thing called, let's say, M over here. Okay, or let's get L actually. Okay, so in that case, I can just go and say, for example, M equal to 53. Now here, if I try to extract out L from this D object, then it gives me an error that cannot redeclare. Because L I already created as an alternative name to property K. So here what I have to do is I have to go and say this L equal to, let's say, let's give some other name, alternative for L. Okay. So now I can print the value of alternative for L and that will just work fine. Okay. Now that's one thing. And by the way, one more thing here, destructuring property that doesn't exist. That's also very important to understand. So let's say if I try to destructure, for example, in this obj, I want to destructure E. Now E doesn't exist in obj. So if I try to do this, it will actually go and work. Like you might expect that will throw an error. So if I do E over here, you can see there's no error. But you will get a value of undefined inside this E because that E didn't had a value. And that's actually very that makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you actually go and say obj.e, that also prints undefined, because e was not having a value, which we already discussed. If you try to access a property that doesn't exist, it will give you a value of undefined, and that's why e was having a value of undefined. Okay, the same goes with nested object as well. If you try to go and say here obj, and now if I want to, let's say, let's see, actually we need to say nested object here. Let's see the nested object. Wait, it doesn't define. Oh yeah, okay. So nested object is inside this. So maybe what I can do, I can just go and create a nested object outside this as well. And let's say I give it a give it some values. So for example, uh, a, b, 4. Okay. So let's say if I go and say here, if I want to extract out, let's give it some other name actually, because it will collide with the above values. So let's say if I go with k, and I give this l, and I give this, yeah, I think this is fine. So if I go and extract out, let's say m from this, then it will give you a value of undefined for m, which makes sense. Again, nested object dot m would also give you undefined, so that makes sense. Okay. If you try to go and extract out k, and from that you try to extract out, let's say n, that will also give you what? That will also give you undefined, because n doesn't exist. So if you go and say n here, you can see you're getting undefined. The same would have happened if you say nested object dot k dot n, which makes sense. Now, I will show you one interesting thing over here, which is very important, and you should understand this properly. The thing is that you know that when I'm doing destructuring on nested object, I can do a nested destructuring, which is what I shown you here, right? But an important thing over here is that you cannot do nested destructuring on a property that doesn't exist. For example, if I try to go and say L over here, now L doesn't exist, which means if I try to go and say console log L, it will actually give you undefined, which is all fine, and it makes a lot of sense as well. But you might think that if I try to do something like this, then O will also be undefined and it will all be fine. There will be no error. But in reality, if you try to do this, then you can see you can't do this. It's giving you an error, cannot read properties of undefined, reading O, which makes sense too. I already shown you in nested objects only that you can't like, although like if you try to print like value, or that value of property that doesn't exist, it will print undefined without giving any error. But if you try to access a property inside that undefined property, then will give you an error. So you know that if you do something like this, nested object dot l dot o, that will give you again the same error, that cannot read properties of undefined reading o. So that hopefully gives you an understanding that why this thing is occurring. Okay. Anyways, let's talk about the next thing, which is destructuring methods and this. So let's imagine that you are destructuring a method from an object. So you know, when I'm trying to destructure a method from an object, that works fine. So let's say if I have let's actually get an object. So maybe from intro to objects I can get this one. Okay, and let's actually modify this to return the value instead of printing it directly. And here, let's say I want to use this. So return this dot h. So you already know that let's actually name this person. Now if I go and say person dot introduce me, that works fine. I'm getting the value properly. The same if I go and say this and I extract out introduce me, and then I try to call introduce me, that also works fine. You can see I'm getting the value my name is Tushar, which is all good. But, and actually one more thing before I talk about the final thing that I wanted to discuss. If I go and say person dot tell my age, that will also work fine, and I will get my age here, which is 20. Now, what will happen if I try to extract out this tell my age function? Now, you might think when I'm trying to call this function just like I did here, it will give me a value of 20. That's what you might think. But in reality, if you try to do this, it will throw an error. Let me show you. So if you go and say console log tell my age, you will see it's giving you an error. Actually, it's giving you an undefined basically. But if you try to have access the value inside this, for example, okay, it will give you it will have given you an error. Okay. But anyways, even if it's not giving you an error, hopefully you understand that here you're getting a value of undefined. And here it was working fine. So why there is a difference? Why this is happening? This is happening because here you were directly returning a value, which is all fine. But here you were returning a value from this. And that is the main problem. The problem is that when you're trying to destructure basically a method, in that case, the method won't be able to use this anymore. And this doesn't just happen with destructuring. Even if you do something like this, for example, tell my age to, and you did person dot tell my age, and then you try to print, then you try to call the tell my age to, that will also give you undefined because this gets lost. So that's the thing. This will get lost if you destructure. That's very important to understand because otherwise you might get some bugs. Just like here you can see this is one of the bugs that it's printing undefined, okay, because this is lost. This will become undefined basically, and that's why it's happening. So I hope that makes sense that if you try to destructure a function, just see if it's using this or not. If it's using this, avoid destructuring like this. Although there are ways to fix this, we will talk about these ways later on, but for now, that's the only solution you have. Let's talk about the next thing, which is destructuring in function parameters, which is actually very interesting thing. You can actually destructure the properties in function parameters, which means you can have some function like this, and you can say this. So, for example, let's say a over here. Now I can just call this function and I can give this to b4, and then I go and print the value of a, and that will give you this, right? But I can actually go and destructure this. So what I can do is that fn alternative, I can just say console log, and I just pass the object first of all. So just like I destructure normally, the same I can do over here as well. So fn alternative, I can do the same over here as well in the function parameters. I can just go and do something like this, and then I can extract out the values. So I can extract out a and b from here, okay, and I can print those things, uh, print those things basically, and you can see it's giving me 2 and 4. So I hope that makes sense that you can actually destructure on the function parameters itself, okay. And by the way, if there are like multiple properties, I can do it with that as well. So I can have this as well, C3, D4, D5, for example. And then I can just go and do this C and D. And then I can print the value of C and D as well with that. So like, again, like multiple parameters can be there, and you can destructure one of these or all of them, you can destructure easily. And here you can also have, like, again, just like giving an alternative name, you can do that here as well. So for example, E4, F5, F6, for example. So or actually let's do one thing, let's give it C over here. So basically here you can extract out C as something else. So you can do something like this, C as, let's say, G, and then F. So here you can just go and print the value of G and F, and that will work fine. Just like that, nested destructuring also works over here. So yeah, everything is same while destructuring of function parameters as well. Okay, so yeah, the main thing is that you can do that destructuring function parameters, and the rest, all the things that we just learned, will be the same. Even this thing like destructuring methods, and this, that is also same. Like if you try to destructure a method in function parameters, it will actually lose the value of this. So that's also very important. Finally, we can also give default values to destructured properties. So basically, if you want, I can do something like this. Let's say if I want to destructure uh, L from this object. Now L would get a value of undefined. Okay. So you can see I get the value of undefined. But you can actually give a value, give a default value to these properties in case if you know that it might exist sometimes and it might sometimes not exist. So in that case, what you can do is that you can give it a default value so that at least it works. Okay. So basically I can do something like this, M, and then I can just go and say, actually M is already there. So let's say N is also there, O is not there, so I can just use that. So I can give it a value of 4, for example. Actually, let's first of all try what will happen if I don't do that. So in that case, you can see it's giving me undefined. But if I give it a value of, for example, 5 or 4, it gives me 5 here, for example, right? So yeah, that's what you can do. The same you can do with destructured like nested properties as well. So let's say I have nested object here, and then I want to get, for example, what I can get. Let's see, nested object is this one. Yeah. So I want to get, for example, from this K, I want to get M. Actually, M already exists, so maybe I can get P. So if I try to print the value of P here, it will give you a value of undefined. But you can give it a default value by just saying P equals to whatever the default value you want, for example, Tushar, and that will just get it the value there. Okay. I hope that makes sense. One last thing here, if you remember, when we were trying to do something like this, it was failing because L didn't exist, and so you can't destructure it. But because you can give it a default value, so you can do something like this, that you give L a default value of an object. Okay. In that case, you can actually extract out the properties easily. So if you, for example, don't do that, if you just say, for example, Z over here, okay, so you can see I'm getting an error, okay. But if I go and give it a default value of an object, so this default value of an object is given to L, and that's why, because it got a default value of an object, you can destructure it because it is no longer undefined. And now if you try to print the value of Z, it will give you an undefined, but it will not throw any error when you're destructuring it. I hope that makes sense. That's how you can do it. So yeah, that's all about destructuring. I hope that all these things make sense. Now let's talk about rest syntax and spread syntax. Now let's first of all talk about rest syntax here. Now I've written the definition over here, but I will explain with example so it's more clear, and then we will come back to the definition. So I will take an example. Let's actually go to destructuring syntax and get the person object from here. So person. So I will get this object. Let me get this, and I will go and put it over here. Now let's destructure this object. To destructure this object, let's say I want to destructure first name and last name. I could do something like this. First name and then last name. That is the thing I can do. And then I can just go and simply print the values and it will work all fine. That is something that is very clear. But let's say if I ask you to get the remaining properties into another object, how you can do that? So in this case, you can actually use something called rest syntax. So by the way, if you don't know about rest syntax, you might think that I will go and here I will extract out all the properties like this. Let me do that first of all. And then I will probably go and create a new object called uh, rest person properties. And then there I will just, get all these properties inserted. Now this seems all right. And actually, if you go and print the value of this object, it will work fine. And you have got the object that has all the properties except first name and last name. So this method works fine, but there's an easier way, and that easier way is basically the rest syntax. So I will do one thing. I will just go and wrap this inside a block, and I'm doing that so that I can create another block and just recreate the first name and last name variable without any kind of issues. So what I will do over here, I will again do the destructuring syntax only. So I will just say person here and I will extract out first name and last name. But with that, to extract the other properties into an object, what I will do is something like this. I will put comma, and then here, instead of extracting out all the properties that are remaining, I will go and say triple dot, and then I will just go and write the name of the constant that should have that object with all the other properties. So I will just go and say rest person properties. Okay. And that will go and put these properties into this object. So you can see that's how easy it is. This code is now just in one line, which is so much easier. I will show you the output here. I will just go and print the value of these things and you will see it works fine. You can see over here, first name and last name, and obviously the rest person properties are inside this. So hopefully that makes sense. That's how you can use the rest syntax. Okay. So as the definition says, it's used for extracting out remaining properties during destructuring of an object. That's the use of it. So I've shown you how you can use this rest syntax in a simple object, but you can also use the rest syntax on nested object without any kind of issues. Let me show you. So I will get the nested object from here. Um, this one, I think this one is much more nested, so I will like to get this one, and then I will just go and paste it over here. Okay, now what I will do, I will just extract out some properties. So what I want to do, I want to go and extract out A and B. Sorry, I want to extract out D, and the rest properties A and B will be in an object. So what I can do, in that case, I can just do something like this, that I can just say D over here, and the rest I want to put in an object. A and B I want to put in an object. So I will just go and say triple dot A and B. Now this object A and B will be created, which will have all these properties. So let me just show you that. I'll just print it and you can see I get the properties inside it. Okay. Now that's easy because we just did it on the parent level, right? I didn't do it on the nested level. Now let's try on nested level as well. So on nested level, let's take example of D because this is the most nested property of this object. So inside that, let's say I want to go and extract out E and I, and the rest I want to put, that is J and L, rest I want to put it in an object. So what I can do, I can just go and destructure it more like we do. And then what we will do, we will just go and extract out E and I. So now I can just print the value of E and I first. And you can see it works fine. Now what I want to do, I just want these two things in an object. So I can just again use the rest syntax just like I used at the top level. I will just use it over here. So I will just go and do something like this, J and L. And now this object will have those J and L property, which you will see now. So I hope that makes sense. That's how you can just go and extract out, do the rest syntax on nested objects. Hopefully that's easy. And then finally, let's talk about the case when there are no properties that are remaining in the object. What will happen in that case? Now, what I mean by that, I'm just going to show you that. So for example, let's actually take this person object only. And obviously you can do this with any object, doesn't matter. So there's a person object over here that's already there. So I will just do one thing. I will just go here and I'll create a block so that variables doesn't collide. And then I will just go and get out the all the properties and methods. I will just get out everything from this object individually by destructuring. So I will just give the first name, last name, age, gender, is married, passion, tell my age, introduce me. I think that should be it. Yeah. So I've extracted out all the properties and methods. Now the question arises, what will happen if I try to use rest syntax in this case? Like there's no property or method remaining in the object to get into the rest object. So what will happen in that case? Let's try out. Now, by the way, you might think that this will cause an error, but remember, we are working with JavaScript. And this is one of the things with JavaScript, right? It just tries to prevent you from getting an error. It just tries to suppress the error in any way it can. Okay. So in some cases, for example, it gives out not a number. Like if you divide 2 by a, for example, it just gives out not a number. Now, if there was any other language like Java or C or C++, it would just have thrown an error that you can't do something like this. But JavaScript there tries to prevent that error. Same goes with divide by 0. If you try to divide a number by 0, that causes infinity instead of causing any error, which is again a thing about JavaScript, that it tries to suppress the error as much as it can. Although at some places it has to throw an error, but at most of the places it doesn't throw. And that's what will happen over here. It will not throw any error. Let me show you. So I will just go and say REST person properties. Now you can see there's no error. So what will be the thing inside REST person properties? Again, you might think it will be undefined, but actually it will be an empty object, because that makes a lot more sense, right? There's nothing left to put in the REST object, and so it will be an empty object. Let me show you. So I will just go and say REST person properties, and you will see it's an empty object. That's what we expected. So yeah, that's about the REST syntax. That's how you can just use this REST syntax, and it has a lot of practical applications. As you go ahead with JavaScript, you would understand that. Let's go and paste it over here, and let's talk about the spread syntax now. Now see, spread syntax is used for extracting out properties of an object into another object. Now what I mean by that, I will show you with an example. Let's say I have an object called obj. I will actually wrap this inside a block. I don't want any kind of collisions to happen. Okay. By the way in which I do this, like I just wrap it around the block so that we don't get conflicts. Don't do that in real life, right? I'm not giving any kind of method to you. You can just prevent the naming collisions with that. Don't do that. Just try to name your variables and constants properly. Here I'm just teaching you. That's why I try to um use these blocks so that's easier for me to teach you without thinking about the variable collisions. But anyways, let's talk about it. So for a simple object, let's first of all see what we can do. So let's say there are like A2, B4. Okay. So these are two properties that this object obj has. So what I want to do, I want to create a new object called obj1. And what I want to do is that I want to, get these two properties of this object into obj1. And obj1, let's say have like c equal to 3, d equal to 5 already with it. So if you see the values of obj and obj1, you will see obj has a value of a2, b4, and obj1 has a value of c3, d5. Now I want to put this object into this object. So how I can do that? Now you might think one way is to actually go and do something like this, that I will just go and say a equal to obj.a and then b equal to obj.b. Now that obviously works. If you see, it works fine and there's no kind of issue. But this is not the easiest way out there, because you see, if there are a lot of properties inside this object, then you have to individually go and do this one by one. Instead of that, there's an easier way. And what's that easier way? The easier way over here is that you just use the spread syntax. So what I will do, I will just go and create an object obj2, and then I will just put c and d here. Now what I will do, to put the values from obj object into obj2, I will use spread syntax. For that, I have to give 3 dots. Now again, this might look similar to REST syntax, but again, what you're doing over here is that instead of doing that in the destructuring part, like if you see over here, where it is, REST syntax, yeah. So you are doing it on the destructuring part, but right now I'm doing this on the object literal, like literal object syntax part. I'm doing that over here. So there's a difference in that. But anyways, I will just go and say triple dot and the name of the object that I want to spread inside this object. So I will just go and say obj over here, and that will spread obj into obj2, which means all the properties of obj will be copied to obj2. I will show you that right now. I will just go and print the value of obj2 and you will see it's getting all the properties of obj. So you can see even if it has like 100 properties, you don't have to do that individually. You can just go and do something like this and it will work fine. And that's the way you can do it. So I hope spread syntax makes sense. That's how you can just use the spread syntax in JavaScript. And this I shown you on a simple object, but you can do that with a nested object as well. Let me show you. So I will actually copy the nested object that we already have from here. Okay. Now, let's say I just, have this nested object. Now what I will do, I will go and create nested object one, two, let's say. Now, what I want to do here, I will add like, let's say, F, and let's say I want to make it like G3, H4. And now what I want to do, I want to, spread this nested object inside this nested object too. So again, the easiest way is to just do something like this, right? And will just work fine. You can see now the nested object has the properties of nested object 2 has the properties of nested object plus the f that it added on its own. Okay. By the way, we can do something like this too. I can just go and say nested object 3, and then here what I will do, I will, let's say, go and create like G, for example. And here what I will do, I will just go and spread, let's say, nested object dot. So let's say I want to spread D dot E. So I will do something like this. So you can see I can spread an object that is nested inside an object. So you can easily do something like this and it will work all fine. Let me show you. So if I print the value of nested object 3, you can see that will show the value properly. Okay. So yeah, that's the thing. So that's how you can do it. And then you see, we can also do one more thing here. By the way, you can see E had F. So F and H are basically inside this object now. Now we can do one more thing, like inside this, let's say I want to extract out, let's imagine D. So I can just go and do something like this, that I will say nested object dot D. So you can see now that here G has the whole object, uh, D object nested, D object like written to it, E, I, J, L, all properties from nested object dot D are written to the G object in it. So yeah, it's not about the position you choose. Like you can choose any kind of position in the object. You can spread directly over there. It doesn't matter. That's the thing. So I hope that makes sense. That's how you can just do it in nested object. By the way, before we go to these parts, I will like to show you one more thing here. So to understand this, let's actually take an example here. Let's say we have obj that has A3, B4. Now, let's say I have obj1 which has A5, B, or let's say C4. Now, what will happen if I try to spread obj into obj1? Now, you might think this will cause an error, but again, remember we are working with JavaScript, right? This will not get any kind of issues. Because see, like you might think it will cause an error because A is there in the obj as well, and A is in obj1 as well. So if you spread that, there will be A, which should not be possible. So it should cause an error, but actually it won't. What will happen is that the A of this will override the A of this. Let me show you. So I can just do something like this. And now if we try to print the value of obj1, you will see obj1 has A as 3 instead of 5 now, because this A was overridden by A inside this obj. Okay. But this happened because this A, this A of 5 was before the time we spread the object. So if you see, this A was there, and then the A with the value of 3 came after this A, which means this was the latest value for A. So what I mean by that is that if I go and say obj2 here, and if I say A5C4 again, but this time instead of spreading obj over here, I spread obj at the top. Then let's see what will happen. So in this case, A will have the value of 5. Now why this is happening? This is happening because A with value of 5 is coming after spreading of obj. So this is after this, which means this will be applied. So that's the thing. So whichever comes later will be applied. That's the rule. So I hope that makes sense, that if you try to spread an object, spread properties into an object having one or more properties already inside it, then it will just override the value. Okay. So the answer is overwriting will occur. By the way, this also applies to nested object, which means if let's say you have nested object 1 and you have A, B equal to 3, C equal to 4, D equal to E5, and you have, let's say, nested object 2, and inside that you have, let's say, F, G, 4, H, 10, and then you have, let's say, A equal to, let's imagine it's I, J, 4. Now what will happen if I try to spread nested object 1 into nested object 2? So hopefully you can understand what will happen. Wait, yeah. So in this case, A from this object will come after A from this object, which means the new value of A will be this. Let's try to see what happens by printing the value. So you can see over here, the value of A is now coming from the above object, which is what is expected over here, correct? So yeah, that's the thing. That's how you can actually use the spread syntax in nested objects, and you can like override the properties if there are any properties that are already there in that object. Now, one more thing over here is that you can actually go and spread multiple objects. That's actually possible. So let's say you have obj a1 b2 obj2, let's actually name it as obj1. Let's say here we go and say C3 A4 const obj3 equal to D5 E6. Now let's say I create obj with this. I just go and say obj1, obj2, obj3, and then I just go and say F equal to 4, H equal to G equal to 7. Now you can see what I did. I actually spread multiple objects into a single object. And that's the thing. That's how you can do it. This is actually possible. So this object will have all these properties with these two properties. And by the way, here you can see I intentionally had A into two objects. Now the question is, which will be the value, the final value in OPJ? So hopefully by now you will be able to understand that the final value will be A equal to 4, because obj2 is spread after obj1, which means the value of A from obj2 will be applied. Let me show you. So I go and say obj here, and you will see that obj has all these properties first of all, and also the value of A is 4 instead of A of 1. So I hope that makes sense. That's how you can just spread multiple objects into a single object. Now, and by the way, here also you can adjust the positions. Like you can do it after this, for example, and also you have to apply the comma over here. That's required. But yeah, you can see that all these things are possible. You can change the positions as well for these things. Okay. Now, let's talk about what will happen if there are no properties that are remaining to be spread. So let's say we have this obj empty object and we have obj1. Let's actually take example from this only. It's fine. So in this case, let's say I just remove obj. Or let's say actually I remove obj2 and I go and empty that object. Now, when you to do something like this, you might expect that obj2 will spreading obj2 will cause any issue, but actually it won't, because again it's JavaScript and will not give you any kind of error. So if you try to spread that object, it will not cause anything, it will not cause any issue, but you won't see any kind of property spread it from that object, which makes a lot of sense, right? There was no property inside obj2, so what will come out of obj2 into obj? Although you can still spread that object, but again, nothing will come out from here. Okay. So yeah, that's all of that. That's about what if no properties are remaining. Now let's talk about one more important thing, which is undefined and null. So let's say you have obj1, which is let's say b3. Okay. Now you have obj2, which instead of an object is null, for example. Now, if I go and say obj1 here and let's say c equal to 4, and then I just do something like this. Now you might think, when I will go and remove the comment from here, it will cause an issue, because null is not an object. I mean, type of null, if you check, like if you go and say type of null, that's an object, but still null is not an object, like, right? Like null, it doesn't have any kind of properties into it. So you might expect that will actually result to an error, but in reality, that won't cause any issue. It will just not spread anything from this, and that's it. Let me show you. So if I do something like this, you can see there's no error here. I can print the value of obj and you will see the properties a, b, and c without any kind of issues. You can see that, right? So that's one more interesting thing to know about, that if you try to spread null into an object, that will not cause any kind of issues. You can directly do that as well. You can do something like this directly. That won't cause any kind of issues. And let's say there's obj3 over here with the value of undefined instead of on object. Now here at least you will think that it will cause an issue, because null was at least type of object, but this is type of undefined, is type undefined only. So this will definitely cause some issue, correct? Well, the answer is no. I will do this and you can see there is no kind of issue. And there's just A, B, and C still inside this object, and this just doesn't do anything. So you can see that this is one of the things you need to understand. If you try to spread undefined or null, I can also do it directly, by the way. If you try to spread undefined or null into an object, that won't cause any kind of issues. Now, that's a good thing for me at least, because I use it a lot. I use this pattern a lot. I will show you how I use it. But for that, we will need to understand about this practical aspect. Okay, so to understand this, I will just give you an example. Let's say you take the input from user for first name. So by some way you take the input. Now how you will take an input from the user, that's a different topic. We are not talking about that. Let's imagine that you took the user input and you stored that inside this constant first name. Okay, so let's say the user input Tushar, and the last name they input was Funny, for example, and then you ask them for gender. So they input, for example, male, right? Now you then go and say, you say is married, then the user inputs false or true. That is what the user has in the options. Now, let's say you want to actually create a function that gives you a final object. So get final person object. Now that function takes an input of person object. So we will just go and say person object. It takes it as the input. So basically, you will create a person object from this and pass it to get final person object. So I will just go and say first name here, last name here, gender I will put is married, I will put. Okay. Now this final person object, let me show you what it will do. Okay, so you can see this, what this function will do is that if person is married and gender is male, then it will add two properties into that object. One is wife's name and one is wife's age. If person is married and gender is female, then it will add two properties into that object, husband name and husband age. If person is not married at all, then it will return the original object back. So that's what this function has to do. So let's write this function. So what we can do is that we can do something like this, that I will just actually, let's first of all destructure this object as well. So I will just go and destructure it here, first name, last name, gender, and then is married. And then what I will do over here, I will just write conditions for all these cases, and accordingly I will return an object. So if person is married, that is if is married. If it's not married, then I will just go and like return the original object. Okay, so I will just go and say first name, last name, gender is married. Okay, I will do that. Otherwise, if person is married, then I will do something else. So what I will check, I will check the gender. If gender is male, then what I have to do, then I have to add the wife name and wife age properties over there. So I will just go and return the object with first name, last name, age, sorry, gender, is married, and then finally I will go and add wife name and wife age. Now for now you can see like I just did something like this where I just added like a empty string name and wife age is added like 20. Now you can take it from user as well, like you will take the input from user, and if the gender is female, then I will go and do the same, but instead of wife name and wife age, I will return husband name and husband age. Okay, I'll just format it if it's not formatted. Okay, so you can see that's what I will do. And see, this is all fine. It will actually work. Let me show you. So I will go and say get final person object and I will pass it. Okay, I've already passed it. If I go and print the object over here, you will see it returns me what? It returns me the original object itself because is married was false. But let's say if I make is married equal to true, then you can see it returns me an object with the wife name and wife age. And if gender was female instead of male here, then you can see it returns me husband name and husband age over here. So you can see that works fine. But there's an easier way to implement this, okay? And that is spread syntax, by the way. I will use spread syntax to do this now. So this is without spread syntax. Let me write it down. Now let's do it with spread syntax. So I will just go and do something like this. Actually, I should do this first of all. And now I will go and say with spread syntax. And I will create the object over here. Sorry, the function over here. I'll get this. And now I will show you what I will do. Now here, I will directly return that object and say first name, last name, gender is married. And now I will do the real magic over here. What I will do, I will check the value of is married. So I will just go and first of all say three dots, and then I will give parentheses over here, and then I will say is married, and then do a ternary check where I if is married, then I return an object like this, or I return this. Now, hopefully you can see what has happened till now. Now, obviously this will not give you the correct result till now. It's not the complete function. I have to do some more things over here, but hopefully you can understand what I'm doing here. I just did a ternary check, and according to that, I'm returning an object. So if it is married, then I'm returning this object. If the user if the person is not married, then it will return this object. Now whatever object it will return will be replaced instead of this expression, which will come over here, and then it will be spread by spread syntax, and then will basically go and spread all the properties into this final object. Okay, so yeah, that's what I'm doing. This is not very hard to understand, hopefully. Now, if is married is true, in that case, I will go and add another nested ternary check of gender. So gender is male, then this, otherwise this. Now inside this, what I will do here, I will just go and, you know, say over here, if gender is male, then I will say wife name and wife age. Then if its gender is female, then I will just go and say here husband name and husband age. So hopefully you can understand that if is married is true, then it will evaluate this ternary condition, which according to the gender will return either this or this. And that will be spread into this final object. But if person was not married, then it will spread an empty object into the final object, which means nothing will be spread into that object and the original object will be returned. That's one of the practical use. So I will now just go and say here console log, and I will just go and call this function over here. So you can see right now what it returns. It returns me first name, last name, gender is married. Basically the original object that I passed. But let's say if I go and say here instead of uh, is married as false, I will say true here, and now you can see it gives me back the wife name and wife age as well. Okay, and if I go here and let's say I just make this female, you can see it gives me back husband name and husband age. So you can see that this program is working perfectly. Now I just want to cover last two things here, and then we will end the lecture here for objects. First of all, I want to talk about constructor object mode. Like we discussed that there are two ways to create an object. One is constructor syntax and one is literal syntax. We tried to create an empty object from both of these syntax, but we didn't talk about how to actually go and create an object with some properties with the with this new object thing. How we can do that? Let's talk about that. And we are already talking about literal syntax a lot. Like all these topics we covered using literal syntax only, but these apply to constructor syntax as well. So I will just talk about how to create an object with some properties using the constructor syntax. So let's see. Let's say I want to go and create an object that is similar to this, right? So using constructor syntax, how I can do that? So see, one thing you need to understand, there are some small things you need to understand before we talk about it. If you go and say, let me actually create a block and write it there. Let's say if you say something like this, then you know that you're creating an empty object. Okay. Then let's say if you, I will now just like not store these object into anything. I will just directly create it and log it. Let's say if you do something like this and you pass it, let's say null, for example. So if you pass it null, you can see that also creates an empty object. Same happens with undefined as well. And that's the reason why when you were spreading null and undefined, you were not getting any kind of issues, right? Then let's say if you try to go and do something like this, for example, you pass a primitive value, let's say Tushar, um, you can see you get something that looks like a string, but if you check the type of it, it is an object. Okay, so I don't want it to confuse you, but again, just understand this, that this will be covered soon. Okay, this portion will be covered soon. Why it is happening, I will talk about it. But the main thing, how to actually add some properties to the object created with constructor. So for example, we have created a object. So what I can do, I can just go and say a dot b equal to 2. So you can see, just like I actually told you in accessing and modifying properties and add and delete properties, I just did something like this. And now if I actually show you, you can see a has this property b. Okay. Same I can add a dot c equal to 4, a dot d equal to 7, and then I can just console log a again. That will give you these properties. Then I can just go and delete, let's say, a dot d or a dot c, and that will just go and have this. I can access one of the properties, for example, a dot d, and that gives me 7. If I try to access a property that doesn't exist, for example, a dot f, that gives me undefined. So everything you see is applicable here as well. One last example that everything works is object dot entries, for example. If I do that, you will see that also works fine, right? That is working fine. Everything is working fine. All these things I've discussed, everything will work fine in this case as well, right? It's just the way in which you're creating the object that differs here. Okay. Finally, you can actually create a new object by using this from an old object. Let me show you. So you can do something like this: const new person equal to new object, and then I will pass person inside this person one. Yeah, person one. And you can see if I try to print the value of new person, you can see it's giving me that person object itself. And again, I can just modify it according to my own wish. For example, I can just modify the age to 21, and that will just work fine. Okay. So here it was 20, here it is 21. So you can see, like, I can also create an object from an existing object. Now that object person one was created by literal syntax, but that doesn't matter. You can also go and create a new object from a object created using constructor syntax, which was a. A was created from constructor syntax, right? I can just go and print the value of it and it will still be the same. So what I wanted to convey here is that there's no functional difference between these two things. You can use anything between this. You can use the constructor syntax, you can use the literal syntax, there will be no difference. As you can see, everything applies on the constructor object as well. Talking about what I use, I prefer to use literal syntax. The reason for that is the readability and the number of words I'm using while writing the code. This is too verbose for me, and this is much better for me because this literal syntax make it easier for me, right? Here I have to go and like create a new object, then I add properties. That's too much for me, and so I just try to always use the literal syntax. Not try, actually I always use literal syntax. I don't see any kind of use for constructor syntax, like, because they are both the same, right? They don't have any kind of difference. And performance wise as well, you won't find any kind of difference as such. Like, there will be negligible difference between the performance, right? So I will always prefer using literal syntax over constructor syntax because of how easier and readable and concise that syntax is, and that's what I will also recommend to you, and that's what I've just written over here. Now let's talk about the last thing that I want to discuss, which is very important to know, and that is a shortcut that will make your life very easy. So if you remember, last time I was talking about spread syntax, I did something like this. If you see, I actually did something like this. Let me actually get these variables, sorry, constants. I also get this. I'll just paste it over here in a block. So you can see what I did. Also I need to, make this an object. So let's say console log. Okay. So you can see what I did here. I basically created an object, and that object, the properties inside that object, I got the value for those properties from constants and variables. In this case, it was just constants. Again, you can use variables as well. And then it's done. But this is fine. Honestly, there's no issue with this, but there's an easier way. And that is a shortcut that you can use. Now, that shortcut, by the way, is only applicable when the property name or the method name is similar to the constant or variable name. Only then this shortcut will apply. Okay, I'll show you the shortcut right now. So I can just do something like this. Let me show you. So I'll just copy this only. and I will just go and say here console log. Now, what I was doing here was that I was just saying first name, and then I was just saying first name over here as well. That was giving the value of this constant to this property. Instead of this, the shortcut is to actually go and just do this. So you can see I didn't give any kind of this colon, right? I didn't give any kind of colon here. And that's the shortcut. You don't need to do that because the constant or the variable name matches the property name. So it will automatically take the value of that variable or constant and put it inside that property in that object. And that's the shortcut. So you can see what I can do. I can just do something like this and that would just work fine. And obviously you can mix that with something like this, for example. So you can say age 20, or let's say you have passion equal to software development, and then you just take that from here. But again, the condition is that the constant or variable name should match the property name. That's the only condition. And by the way, this will also apply with the methods. That's it. So I think we have covered a lot about objects in this lecture, but just for your information, it's not the complete discussion about objects. There's a lot we need to discuss that we will do in the subsequent lectures, and there's a lot related with objects for other topics as well. Like the other topics we're going to talk about, like functions or arrays. These are all related with objects in some way. So that discussion is also left. So we'll talk about all that in the subsequent lectures. For this video, that's all we are going to cover. And hopefully you understood these things. I know it's a very long lecture, but if you have any doubts, you can always ask me in the comment section below. That's it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye.